Hey, it is 9:33, and I think we can go ahead and get started and we can let people in as well. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. We are lucky to have Yev Veverka here with us today. She has a Ph.D. BCBA-D with the University of Autism Center. She is a graduate of the University of Washington's doctoral program in special education with an emphasis in applied behavior analysis. Yev has been working with children with autism in the field of ABA since 2007. A parent of three herself, she is especially passionate about empowering parents and caregivers by equipping them with tools and strategies. Yev's area of expertise is in the support of mealtime and feeding challenges. With an interdisciplinary team of co-authors, she has published a book on this topic, Meaningful Mealtimes: Practical Strategies for All Young Eaters. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Yev. Thanks again for joining our group this morning. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Laura. That's so kind. I am going to share my screen and then talk a little bit more about kind of how I got here. Okay. So I'm really excited to be here. I work with Chelsea Deaconson, and I think that's how I got connected to this group. But Laura is a familiar face. I know other folks in your group, so it's fun to be connected. So as Cindy said, I've done research and clinical work in the area of feeding and mealtime, particularly for the autistic community. She mentioned I have three kids, and my oldest has autism. That's how she prefers for me to talk about it, or to identify her. And so a lot of like what's guided my work has been parenting and feeding my children, particularly my children who are sometimes anxious about new foods, sometimes struggle with change. And and that's I've had a lot of aha moments that have kind of like shaped how I have changed how I do things. So in this, I really struggle. I can talk about mealtime for like 10 hours. In fact, I do sometimes in workshops. So I really struggled to condense this. And if I skip through slides, I'll just send them to you all. And my hope today is to kind of share a little bit about my lens and how I got to this work, um, a little bit about what a tiered approach to mealtime and feeding support is, and what kind of guided what our book is about, and what guided that work, and then a little bit about how we're bringing this into the UW Autism Center, which I'm actually new there as of January, but I've been connected to the University of Washington Herring Center before that. So I feel like I can still tell this story, but it's getting to the point where a lot of people have heard it now. Um, I'm gonna come to I promise I'll get to the Lucky Charms, but first I want to say that I got interested in feeding and mealtime support back when I was really early in my career as a behavior technician, before a behavior technician was even a thing. I was working in homes with families, and I noticed that 100% of my families, literally every family, had mealtime concerns, whether their child didn't want to participate in the family mealtime, or they weren't eating enough, or they weren't eating a variety of food, or new food scared them. And they started asking for support with this. Um, and so I started going to conferences, but just from the behavioral side of things. So ABA conferences on feeding, I read all the articles. And in these conferences, I would sit in them, kind of like my heroes of the feeding world, I thought. Um, and I would actually, let me just pause and say, I strongly believe that everybody was doing the best they could with the information they had. So anything I say here is without judgment, but I do think that it's important to say that when we know better, we do better. And that's kind of been my motto going through this work. Um, and so I started going to these conferences, and I watched these videos of kids going from like crying and refusing food and gagging to going through this protocol. And in the end, taking bites. The graphs were beautiful, right? Like we went from 0% consumption to 100% consumption. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. And so I went back to these homes and I implemented the same protocols and they just didn't feel good. Like I didn't want to do them. Kids were gagging, kids were crying, families were kind of unsure. And I was like, but this is what our research says. I don't understand. So fast forward, I came to the University of Washington, and my doctoral advisor sent me over to an intensive feeding clinic to learn more when I told her of the story and that I just wanted to learn a little bit more. And the story of Lucky Charms comes in here. So I was observing as an intern, I was observing a feeding program, and we're going to call this little guy, not so little, I guess, Sam. He's 9 years old when he came to this program. And by the time he came in, he was eating Lucky Charms marshmallows as his main meal. So that was how he was getting most of his calories. Lucky Charms marshmallows, some crackers, and milk. Literally, his family was buying bulk Lucky Charms marshmallows, which is not cheap. Um, and so by the time he came in, he had a history of challenging meal times, right? Like distress at meal times, a lot of pressure, a lot of coaxing, a lot of coercing to try to get him to eat. And his family also had a history of distressing meal times. And so I watched this program where a piece of new fruit or vegetable was put on a spoon, a tiny, tiny piece, and Sam was told, take a bite. And Sam said no. And Sam was told, take a bite. And Sam hit the spoon. He didn't have a lot of verbal language. And Sam was told, take a bite. And he gagged and he stripped down and he urinated on the floor and he vomited. And the person kind of like in charge of this program said, I looked at her and she had kind of like was tearing up. And she said, it's really hard when it gets to this point, but sometimes it's the only way. And I looked at his family and they were tearing up. Um, and I didn't feel comfortable. And I was like, I would never bring my kid here. And so I was like, either I don't want to do feeding or I want to find a different way. Like I want to understand more about how does it get to this point. And so I went to my advisor that day. And I asked her some questions. I told her what I saw, and I said, where was Sam as a 3-year-old? Like his family didn't start by offering him Lucky Charms marshmallows only as a meal, right? Like this happened over years of meal times. And then I asked her, is this really the only way? And I don't know, like, but beyond Laura, do folks know Eileen Schwartz? Okay, so if you do, you could probably picture this. So Eileen was my doctoral advisor, and she was like really good at just like pushing us to figure things out. And she crossed her arms and leaned back, and she's like, "That's your doctoral work. Figure it out." um, can you picture it, Laura? Yes. Okay. So Eileen told me to figure it out, and when Eileen tells you to do something, you do it. And so I started talking to other folks in different disciplines. I was working at the Herring Center at the developmental preschool there at the time with some of my research and as a doctoral student. And we started kind of going back in time with kids like Sam and asking questions. Like when we saw a kid that was like 5, 6, that had severely restricted diets or like a lot of distressing experiences around mealtime, we started asking like, where did this come from? What happened? And here's what we learned. So first, anybody that's a parent has probably seen this. When you go to a child, like a well child checkup, you're going to have this questionnaire, and they ask you this question. Does your child eat a good variety of foods? And probably most parents and caregivers at age like 2, 3 are going to say no. And so this is what Sam's family did at age 2 or let's say 3. They said, no, our child does not eat a variety of foods. So the doctor comes in and says, I noticed this. Tell me a little bit about it. And they say, Sam is so picky. It makes meal times frustrating and stressful. We have to prepare special meals. We're worried about his nutrition. And the pediatrician responds with something that families hear all the time. And again, just the pediatricians are responding to ease the minds of families that this is normal because like it is technically normal, but still concerning, right? So he says something along the lines of this is really normal. Most kids are picky at this point while they're exploring. Let's just wait and see how he's doing next year. Just keep doing what you're doing and try not to worry. If anybody is a parent and has been told to try not to worry, it doesn't work, right? Um, he said he's growing fine. He seems to be eating enough variety. He's getting his calories. It's okay. Then they go home that same day and they're like, well, how do we feed him dinner, right? So Sam also has an ABA provider or whatever provider, but some sort of therapy that he's in, and they go to that therapist and say, like this is a concern. The doctor's not worried, but can you help us? And this was me as a provider too. It's something along the lines of like, this is really outside of my scope. I've been told I need specialized training to work on feeding. I don't want to cause harm. And so nobody can really help. And so the family is doing their best, but over the year, they're trying new strategies. Sam's dropping foods. And so 1 year later, they are completely stressed. His Sam is now waking up at night asking for more milk. He's dropped more foods. We're on our way to just those marshmallows, right? And maybe it's because of the way those foods are being offered. Um, I'm gonna hit admit on the waiting room because it's on my screen, if that's okay. Maybe that's the way because of the way foods are being offered, or maybe he's having some internal things happening with his digestive system. We don't know why, but he's continuing to drop more foods. And now he goes to the pediatrician, and the doctor's like, "Ooh, he's only eating these like few foods. He's actually dropped a little bit on his growth chart. You're right. Maybe it's worth sending you to a specialized feeding clinic." So they get the referral to the specialized feeding clinic, and when they call, what do you think they're told? Opening the chat if you want to participate.
Waitlist.
Yes, yes. So
We'll see
they're
you in
told
two
there's,
years.
oh, what's that?
We'll see you in 2 years.
We'll see you in 2 years. Exactly. It's like, I think the ones in the Seattle area are 12 months if you're lucky, 18 months to 2 years. Or when I was working in this program, it was about 2 years of a wait list. And while they're on the wait list, there is no support. So there is like Instagram resources, right? That tell you like you could be scrolling and like one post tells you you have to do it this way, and the next post tells you the exact opposite. And so families are really lost. Um, and then they have other things going on too that they're trying to deal with. So by the time Sam is seen, it makes sense that he has dropped foods to the point of Lucky Charm, marshmallows, and milk. And so our my team of co-authors is this incredible interdisciplinary team of practitioners. They've all worked in classrooms. They've all worked one-on-one with students. They're not researchers. They're not academics. They are on the ground working with kids all the time. And this like learning the story kind of on repeat and realizing how much of a pattern this is and reading the research and how frustrated families are to continue to be told it's okay, don't worry when it is a concern, has really inspired us to like think about how to systemically think about a new way. So that led us to this tiered approach to mealtime and feeding support. So I'll say this isn't revolutionary. This isn't new. We didn't make this up. This is completely based on like, usually it's a pyramid model, right? There's a reason we have circles, but this is based on the multi-tiered system of supports used in school. It's based on the prevention model of care used in public health. And we said, well, why don't we apply it to feeding and mealtime? Um, and so in our tiered approach, we think about tier one as universal support. And in this, we're asking the question, what do we need to provide children, families, staff, early support providers across the board to foster successful, enriching meal times in the early learning experience and setting. So whether this is like resources for families to understand how to feed our children, because like anybody else that's a parent, we're we're sent home from the hospital knowing how to breastfeed and knowing to put our kid on their back to sleep, and then we're on our own, right? So we don't know how to necessarily introduce solids. We're getting this information from different sources. So how do we teach families how to provide food in kind of like a low pressure way, in a way that promotes autonomy, in the way that teaches kids to listen to their body right away, like from early on. And the beauty of this is, if this is like, this is my dream ideal world. I'm a, what do I call it? Practical idealist, if that's a thing. Like, I know that this is ideal, but I also like want to practically kind of put the pieces together. So in my ideal world, tier one is everywhere, right? Like, all families know how to feed their children, and all teachers and childcare staff and anybody that eats with or feeds children knows these basic strategies of how do we present food, with the goal of preventing a lot of this, right? Like, as soon as we drop a food and it's like distressing, what can we do to keep it from spiraling into something more? So prevention as the key for tier one. And ideally, this would solve about like 80%-ish of these challenges, because it is a common developmental thing. It is normal, in quotes, but we still need support for it. The beauty of this, we can see right away when, if everybody's doing tier one, like if we have a preschool where all teachers know how to present food, where there's a variety of food presented, where kids are taught to explore in ways that are comfortable for them, then we can immediately identify if kids need additional support or modifications. So we can right away see, like, this isn't enough. So this kid might keep developing this challenge, and let's intervene and support early. So that's tier two, and that's kind of the space I mostly work in. I do a lot of training for tier one, and I'm assuming most of us on this call would be more like in that tier two area, because by the time we're working with kids, they've already kind of like shown us that they need more than universal support. And then tier three is that kind of like referral to those really special, intensive, individualized supports. So when I talk about this, I actually say I don't call myself a feeding therapist. I say I support mealtime. I'm not going to do that kind of like intensive support, but I am going to support families and making mealtime work for them, and sometimes, and then refer out when needed. Okay, I'm going to skip this slide and keep going, looking at the time. So we ask the question, like, how do we know, or we get asked this question all the time, how do we know when to intervene? And I hope that you all take this with you when people ask this, because families, again, are like so frustrated at the dismissal of their concerns. And we get a lot of, isn't this just normal? I was picky and I grew out of it. Like, you're making a big deal out of nothing. I still have to convince my own like strict Russian parents that this is a real thing. They're like, you were picky, you're fine. And I'm like, yeah, but now I remember having to chew that meat. Like, there's things I don't want to eat anymore because of the way I was taught to grow out of it, right? And you all probably have similar experiences. And so when we get asked this question, this is kind of my soapbox issue that I hope you all make your soapbox issue. When we get asked this question of when is it bad enough to refer, we can think about clinical diagnoses, and I encourage you all to visit the website feedingmatters.org for more information on kind of the clinical diagnoses. I think it's something like 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with pediatric feeding disorder. I don't know the prevalence of avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, but this ARFID is what we're going to more commonly see with autistic kids. But my big thing that I try to leave as a takeaway for folks is that subclinical challenges are also valid. If mealtime is distressing, if mealtime isn't nourishing, if mealtime isn't inclusive or doesn't lead to connection, then we can intervene, we can support. And so I tell families, we don't have to wait. When they say, when is it bad enough? Like, when should I ask for a referral? If they're asking that question, that means we can support. And that's kind of what I'm trying to push in, and why I get so excited to be asked to talk about this wherever possible. When you look at these slides coming up, we can talk about, it'll talk about things that happen if mealtime isn't easy. Um, our definition of a mealtime challenge beyond the clinical things like that I mentioned, like undermining their sense of safety, impacting stress or emotional health. There's also a slide on why eating can be difficult. And the reason I have this in here is because it's such an interdisciplinary, complex thing, and that trying to solve it as a single discipline is problematic. And so, like I've said, my approach has changed so much by partnering with um, my colleagues and from other disciplines, and I've learned so much. And so I encourage you all to like make friends with other disciplines and ask what they know about feeding or contact me and I'll connect you. But then what we did is, okay, so we decided we really wanted to think about universal strategies. And within this, we came up with 5 elements of a tiered approach. And they're numbered in order here, but you can think of it as a cycle of like these are things we want to do for all families. So in tier one, where sometimes we focus in our book, it's just how do you gather information about your entire class or all the kids you serve in your clinic or what have you. And then how do you identify based on that kind of which kids need additional support, what that support is, how do we develop goals, how do we ongoing do some ongoing data collection and assessment, and communication and collaboration to ensure we're making progress. So when we teach folks to gather information, and I'll talk about how we're doing some of these things in our clinic, we're talking about gathering information, including understanding biases about yourself, your own mealtime. I could talk about this one piece for an hour, but mealtime is very emotional, and there's a lot of expectations that come into it by adults. And so understanding kind of your expectations and hopes for mealtime as a provider is a good starting point. Then we gather information about the child and about the systems that they are a part of. So when you come back to, again, I'm keeping slides in here so you have them, but don't have time to talk about all of them. You can come back to these slides about kind of understanding biases, gathering information about children, and then gathering information about systems and environments. And then we jump into developing goals for kids. This is a very busy slide for kids that need additional support. This is just an example of kind of how we break it down in our clinic, but also how we talk about it in our book is kind of like what is this end vision and really pushing that it's not consumption. Consumption might be a part of it, but our end vision isn't my child will eat 7 bites, like or arbitrary number of bites of a vegetable, right? Because we don't know that. We don't know like how many bites of each food group an individual needs to thrive. We can work with a registered dietitian to support us in learning that, but ultimately, when we talk about our visions for mealtime, we talk about enjoyment. We talk about building skills. We talk about building autonomy because I always think about we're looking at this 3-year-old now, but they're going to be a 30-year-old, and we don't want them eating 7 bites to get their cookie because that's how they were taught to eat, right? We want them knowing how to understand when I'm hungry, how to respond when I'm hungry, how to know what I need, and then how to participate in a way that feels nourishing for me, whether that's with a group or whether that means I need to eat alone because your chewing is too loud, and then I will come join after the meal and participate and feel included that way. And so it's really um, goes beyond kind of this behavioral lens or any sort of siloed disciplinary lens, which is why I really stress interdisciplinary work with this. If you watch the recording back, I wonder how many times I said interdisciplinary in this talk, but it's important. So we help families set goals. We choose strategies for each goal, and that includes things like creating a supportive environment, creating low pressure opportunities for exploring with food. Again, you can come back to these slides. I'm very happy to share. Like Cindy or Sarah, I'm okay to send it to you. Okay. Um, we talk about repeated exposure, but not in the way of like take a bite, try it in the way where we're embedding things that are internally motivating to children. So if a child is curious about how food grows and then how we harvest it and how it gets to the grocery store, we might do that. If a child's interested in art, we might make some fun little faces on our plate. And I don't have time to get into it, but we do go deep into kind of, not deep, but we go into conversations about like making sure it fits family values and expectations. So thinking about things like food insecurity and being mindful of our recommendations at where just going out and getting a new food to try or playing with food doesn't align for all families. So that's part of our information gathering is how do we make sure this is aligning with specific needs um, and values. This is just one specific example that if anybody's looking for a practical, like Monday strategy, if you're working with kids or if you want to share this, this is kind of my go-to first strategy. So I left it in here, but usually I'll present 100 slides of strategies. So I call this the yes but diet or the conditional diet. And a lot of times our kiddos, our autistic kids, will be starting in a really kind of like I don't want to use the word rigid because I don't mean it in a negative way. A logically like specific diet. There's a reason for it. And so I might say, does your child eat chicken? And a caregiver might say, yes, but only in dinosaur shape, only in nugget form. It has to be air fried, not microwaved. It has to be served at the right temperature, and it has to be dipped in ketchup. And a lot of times, what we hear is either caregiver or staff or provider is trying to introduce new food and just working on like touching a strawberry. But if we can't even eat, or if we're feeling uncomfortable with a nugget that's shaped as a star instead of a dinosaur, or that doesn't isn't served at the right temperature, going to let's touch a strawberry is a huge step. And so I realize this sounds dramatic, and I think it still is accurate that when I compare it to somebody that is afraid of heights or uncomfortable with heights, if I say, we're going to push through and we're going to be brave and we're going to get you over your fear of heights today, guess what? We're going bungee jumping. Like, I know that seems like a really big leap, but it is comparable. Um, and maybe not for all, right? But so I first work with families and providers and classrooms on teaching change and teaching comfort with change and teaching it in a way that's not coercive or full of like external kind of reinforcement, but making it internally fun. So like if a kid likes a piece of cheese and they like a butterfly, can we take a cookie cutter and cut out a butterfly out of the cheese? Kid always wants their cheese in square form, but can we make it a butterfly and make that in motivating and fun so a kid can see, okay, I can trust this. It's still my cheese, and now it's in this cool shape of my favorite creature. Change is good, change is fine, change is okay. I'm comfortable and like slowly work our way up that way. So, um, and I'm call myself a critical friend of ABA. Like I support the science. I am proud to be part of it, and I have lots of concerns of how we've done feeding as ABA providers and how we've jumped so far that we're kind of undermining all of a child's cues and sense of safety. So if you don't take any other, oh, this is probably the only practical strategy that's in here, but I'm happy to share other things I have that are all full of practical strategies if you're a provider, trying to make this as general as possible. Okay, so we've got our strategies, and then we have ongoing assessment. So this is where we're taking data to drive decisions about do I continue these strategies or do I try something new or do I tweak it? And here we really stress that we're looking at quantitative measures, of course, but also qualitative measures. And we want to kind of cross-analyze those. So if a graph, like I shared at the beginning, I used to go to these talks and the graphs looked really good, but then I saw it in practice and I felt really bad. So a graph can show this consumption looks great, right? We went from 0 to 90% consumption. Our spitting out behavior went to 0%. Our refusal behavior went down. But if we're not measuring qualitative data, if we don't see that a child is suffering their way through this and gagging, and the parent is crying and not going to do it at home, then we're completely doing these families a disservice. So we have to understand that a graph can look really good for consumption, but it doesn't measure that there's distress in there. So we're always asking families, how does this feel? Is this feasible? We're always looking for either asking children or looking if they're um, cannot verbally tell us. We're looking for those subtle cues of like facial expressions, and these are really subtle. This is what I've learned from my SLP and OT colleagues, things that I was not picking up on. Um, Little things in their mouth. So, like if you think about a food that completely disgusts you that you don't ever want to take a bite with, actually, let's do this as a quick exercise. Think about a food that you don't ever want to take a bite of. You can put it in the chat or just say it. Something that disgusts you. Green beans, beets. Beets always comes up. Raw onion, oysters, thumbtacks. Okay, yeah. Wouldn't take a bite of that either. Whoever's just coming in is going to hear just like these disgusting foods being listed. Caviar. Okay, so now picture yourself taking a bite of it. Like picture yourself taking a bite of that food, chewing and swallowing. Like really picture it. Laura, I'm sorry, I'm looking at your face. Yeah, so you probably are feeling something, right? Like you are having it might be subtle. Yeah, like you're having maybe a gag reflex. You're maybe leaning back. You're something's happening in your mouth, like your tongue might be kind of doing some things. And that is the kind of thing we're looking for too. And so it's not enough to say the child accepted a food, they took a bite and swallowed versus they didn't. We want to pay attention to those cues of like this child took a bite despite their body telling them like this disgusts me, this doesn't feel good. And again, like I think I can be kind of dramatic about this, but I feel so strongly about it. I think we're breaking children into like taking bites before that external reinforcement to get out of it, to like to just get through it. But I think that when we do that, even though it looks successful on paper, um, we're building habits that are going to be troublesome for these folks as adults. And we hear this, right? Like we've heard these stories. And then the last part of our elements is communication, collaboration with family and other providers. So on these slides, I talk about interdisciplinary collaboration, and you can see kind of just different provider roles. Behavior analyst isn't on here because usually this is for a talk for behavior analysts, but we can be on there too. So my role in our clinic is parent support and coaching and transferring skills that we're working on in the clinic to the home environment. And then the slide I realize is a little bit blurry, but something that we came up with because we had a lot of conversations about like, well, if we're focusing solely on autonomy, sometimes we're not keeping kids safe. So like if we're only focusing on letting this child eat what they want when they want, and not working towards anything else, then we might be have some issues with nutritional balance, with health, with safety. If we're only focusing on nourishment, then we might not be working at all on teaching hunger cues, teaching about autonomy. And so these are just some examples of all the things that kind of like go into this push-pull of how we choose to work on feeding. And there's not a one size fits all. And this is something we talk to families about and to practitioners about all the time, is that there are so many different factors. And it is an important thing in our process to understand this individual child and all that surrounds them for these factors when we make our decisions about how to push forward and what to prioritize. And so you'll never hear me say, I never do blank or I always do blank. It's a lot of it depends. And I'll just briefly share how we're connecting this in the UWAC feeding program. We're building the plane as we fly it, image courtesy of Chat GPT. It's the best I could do. Um, And we don't want to be building it as we fly it, but we also don't want to pause and not serve families. So I'll show you kind of like our vision and tell you where we're at. And we're always happy to talk to you about if you want to replicate this or how to refer or kind of whatever you, I'm super happy to talk to anybody about anything feeding or mealtime. So this is really busy. I'll come back to this at the end, but first I'll share. This is kind of our um, process from entry to exit, including triaging, our individualized services, our ongoing assessment, and then exit upon either meeting goals or being on track to meet goals and having enough strategies that they, like I had a family this week say, we're actually ready to fade back to once a month now because I think that we can do this. So that's our goal. Okay, so we have either an internal referral from one of our clinicians or an external referral from the community. We triage to assess this kind of the severity and the needs. While the process moves forward, we have resources. We're working on this part. We have resources on, how to feed your child. Where are some free courses for caregivers? I'm happy to share those as well when I send the slides. From there, we, as an interdisciplinary team, decide on kind of what services a family we want to offer a family, and we always do this with them as part of the team. So, let me just explain the language here. Low severity means like the impact of the feeding challenges is mild on the family's quality of life. So maybe they're eating enough foods that nutrition isn't concerned, but the family would like some support on how to kind of remove some pressure from their mealtime and make it more enjoyable. Or low caregiver capacity. So a family that can't come in the slot we offer, or they can't join us on Zoom. We then don't do actually these are still in the caregiver group coaching is coming in the fall. But embedded support means we're training their existing providers to embed feeding with feeding support in their existing services. So if they already have ABA, we're working with the ABA providers to support that. And then we've got high severity and high capacity. And so we do a transdisciplinary intake where we're all involved. We all come together in our weekly meetings to determine kind of what we're going to um, provide. And this is a mix of direct services with the child and caregiver coaching. And we've done all sorts of combinations of that. And again, we're building it as we're flying it. So we're constantly right now taking data and like, was this the right model for your family? What would you add? What would you take away? And we're tweaking as we go. And then we're offering wraparound support. So we're partnered with Nutrition Next Door at the IHDD where we can refer now. We're offering resources if like our recommendations include exploration with food. We want to make sure that they have access to food, mental health support for the families and children, but like there's a lot of stress in it, so we can refer to our psychology services and so on. So again, it's all in process right now. We're very open to feedback and questions. Okay, took 45 minutes. Let's open it up. Thank you all for putting up with me on my soapbox, Peter.
This is really, really uh fascinating, and I do really appreciate the qualitative focus. I think that's incredibly critical and very much lost. Something that so I am an autistic advocate. I do a lot of self-advocate and do a lot of advocacy. I'm also someone who eats literally the same breakfast every day, and has my own stuff going on, and I'm fine with that. And Something that I am pushing for as a whole, but I think could be incredibly powerful and want to just see if this is a direction that could be a thing, is the inclusion of autistic peer advocates in this to be that sort of, I have this concept I'm always talking about called lived expertise, not lived experience. You want people to be experts at figuring out how to make autism work, be really good at having autism, and be really good at living this, so they can provide that sort of, I call it autistic empathy because, yes, we do have empathy. It just looks very different. Um, but having worked with a lot of teens who have disclosed some really interesting feeding stories that actually um, correlate with issues around consent, and having had stories where their bodily autonomy was violated pretty heavily due to feeding, and then as a teenager they had no idea how to say no when someone was touching their body in a way that didn't feel right. There are some pretty significant ways this can go south if
Sure.
that advocacy is not built. And it seems like you're really doing a good focus on really trying to uplift the qualitative aspects. Like everything I hear is like, yes, this is good stuff, but are there paths, or is there looking at ways to include um, you know, peer advocates just to provide that sense of hope, that sort of, again, autistic empathy. We see each other's wavelength, and be able to say, I know exactly what this feels like.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
not picking up on this,
Yeah. I love
but
that.
this, when I said thumbtacks, that's you want to talk about what it's like to eat something nice. It's not like, oh, I just don't like the texture of green peppers. No, it's like trying to put thumbtacks in your mouth.
Ugh, that's such a powerful metaphor. And I
I
love,
almost said broken glass, but that would have been a bit too grotesque.
I mean, I love this question. I think, yes, there for sure have been conversations. We did an echo group for caregivers, and we did include our autistic psychologist, Lucas Harrington. Was it?
I'm talking with him literally right now.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
insane.
Lucas knows my work very well,
Yeah,
believe
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, I'm just chatting with him right now. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so he has been an invaluable source of information and mentorship. Um, I love this idea of peer support, and I would love to explore that with maybe both of you or whoever is well. Like, if you're, I
Okay.
don't want to put you on the spot to like.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
I would love to chat offline and
Sure, yeah, I'll connect with you. I also will say, Marsha Dunn Klein from the Get Permission Institute is an occupational therapist that has been doing a lot of work. I think she just recently connected with Lucas too, but she's been interviewing folks with these lived experiences. I don't know what she's going to do with it next, but so like I think we could really use some guidance on like how to connect it all.
beautiful.
I agree that it's important.
Well, Lucas says you're very cool. So, and Lucas and I are very good friends. So,
Good. I'm so glad for that endorsement. No,
yeah,
he and
yeah,
I
yeah.
work
No,
very well together.
if Lucas is cool with you, I'm cool with you.
Yes. I'll have to text him after this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Laura.
Hi. So yeah, we down here we have an ongoing issue with access to any providers, let alone specialty providers. Um, and we also have a lot of families who have those overlapping needs of food insecurity and transportation issues. We don't have reliability in a lot of those resources to work on these things. So one of the things that I've always been really passionate about in an adjacent level. So I love your last slide where it maps out how to do things, but I'm kind of curious, one about just kind of the range of what's your most intensive intervention? Like, is it weekly? Is it daily? And then you said monthly, but then are you guys at the point where you have how do you know when you're done? Like what that range is of options? And then do you have any tips for us South Sounders who just have I do think a much more challenging um, task of trying to connect resources and providers in a very uninterconnected world. I mean, this group is a fantastic example of a lot of people who are working on that, and we're making huge strides, and it's so much better, but also that's still a challenge for a lot of families. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great, both great. The first one, our most intensive is weekly. And if somebody, like, we probably would refer beyond that, but we don't feel comfortable referring to somewhere with a really long wait list. So this is still just a work in progress, right? Like in my ideal world, it would be this person needs an intensive like every day, although that's not always logistically possible
Right.
and it's really expensive. So I do feel really strongly that we can treat more than we think we can by embedding it within their parenting. Like these, I counted once of like if parents are feeding or caregivers are feeding kids 3 to 5 times a day, then it's something like oh gosh, I don't even remember, like 100 times a month of like of negative experiences.
Right.
If we flip that to 100 times a month of positive experiences by changing these little elements of mealtime, then I really think we can prevent more than we've been preventing. But again,
That's cool. Yeah, I like that concept.
and then for the second thing, I think it connects because, well, one of the things I'm really interested in talking about is building capacity. I think we've all been told feeding is so complex, so we can't touch it. And that's where I think that continuum is really important. Like, yes, feeding is really complex and we should understand the basic complexity of it as humans, but we all eat. We shouldn't, as parents, we all feed our children. We have to do that. And so parents are capable of feeding their children. And so I think like really focusing on that building capacity, like who needs to learn these things first, that tier one, and then building it from there. I mean, that's what we're doing in Seattle too. We're not there yet either. We're not connected at all with this. But starting with kind of that universal, where does all of this basic knowledge need to go first? And I'm happy to chat with you, Laura, offline.
Yeah.
Like who can we train? That's been my big thing is like focusing in the ABA world of building capacity. You're eating with kids, so stop avoiding supporting
Right.
it, but also do it right. Like
Right.
do it in a
Right.
way
Right.
that's gonna be like supportive and all the things Peter
Right.
said. Starting with that first tier is really important because it's harder to go from intensive down.
Totally agree.
But yeah, we developed a task force here in Seattle to kind of bring stakeholders together to talk about it. And we've done some work, like talking to the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. We've done some work with like parent groups and getting info out there, but it's overwhelming sometimes to think of how much there is. But if you all start doing it too, like that's why I'm like, come on, let's do it together. Jill.
Think sometimes as well they're all now adults now, but I had 3 specific eaters. So 2 on the autism spectrum and 1 slow gut because of cardiac. So eating was always a challenge. And I'm a bit of a chaotic eater myself. But I think the farther I got out of the, oh, you have to eat, and went back to the intimacy of feeding my children. So when they were infants, that intimacy of feeding my child, and went back into that headspace, it wasn't this forced space. Then it was easier to communicate with them and do, like you said, that listening, so that it was a shared back and forth. They were older, they were no longer toddlers, or they were no longer, but it was more of a, okay, hey, my body doesn't like food at 7 or 8 in the morning. It just won't process it, so I have to wait till later to eat, because it just doesn't function that way. Or I have to eat specific things at specific times, but then I'll shift at another time of day because my body then will process this kind of food. So it was us learning to communicate with each other and then trying new things. And
That's beautiful.
yeah, it
I
took us a long time though to get
yeah.
to that place.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? Like sometimes we can intuitively get there after a lot of trial and error. But like, what if we flipped that and said, hey, parents, when you first introduce salads, here's the most important things. Like you just need to feel joyful about it. You don't need to feel like, should I be doing baby-led weaning or 100 first foods or salad
Right,
starts or all
right,
these
right,
things?
right,
There's just so much pressure out there on families.
right.
So that's such a beautiful example of like how you got
How
there
can
that
I
whole lot.
let them finger paint with their mashed bananas? You know, it's like, how do you make it instead of a regimented, oh, we have to do this? Like you said, how do we make this that intimacy of, hey, I'm feeding my child again,
Yeah.
kind of a space?
Yeah. So that's the question, Jill. That's it. Thank you for sharing. Well, Cindy and Sarah, sorry I took up all the time.
Yeah, no worries at all. Yev will share her slides with us. Thank you so much. And then we'll put them on the SSAP website as well for you all to look at. Does anybody else have any last minute questions while we still have her here with us?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Yev.
Good to see you. Okay, I'm gonna hop off and send you.
Okay, yeah.
You too. Happy June.
Yes, enjoy.